Hi, it's Jay Fisher. The purpose of this video is to help clients that are new to see-through partners, new to Macromonitor, to understand the processes that we'll go through. And I've broken those down into a couple of things. First is onboarding. What are the steps that we go through with bringing you into our environment and making sure that that we deliver a high-quality service um, to you, and that we're compliant with requirements put upon us by CMS as a CMS certified registry. We'll also talk about once the onboarding process is complete, what should you expect throughout the balance of the year on through and even after the MIPS data submission process. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about what are the operational stages of your relationship with Macromonitor. Now, we've defined kind of a 10-step stage or 10-stage process. And those are broken down into two groups of activities. First is what we'll call onboarding activities, the things that happen from the point where your contract is executed until we've reviewed and validated the data stream that we're receiving from you directly and or from your billing company. Once all those data streams are locked in and solid, we move into the optimization and submission activities that are part of our normal ongoing cycle as well. So the whole thing starts, of course, with the contract being executed. And one of the things to note here is that you notice how we say that this is completed when the contract, BAA, and consent are documented in Macromonitor action items. So you'll see everything that we do in this cycle and other things that we do throughout the year. The Macromonitor action items repository is a repository of important documents, meeting notes, and other things that are of value. So you want to make yourself familiar with that part of the Macromonitor tool, and we'll show you how to navigate that in our initial planning meeting. The next stage is once the contract is done, you will be receiving, or you will have received, an invitation with credentials to the Macromonitor database. Now there's two types of access that get granted here. Number one, it's us sending you a set of credentials to access Macromonitor. The second thing that's going to happen is that you should look for a request that will come to you through your HARP account, where we're going to be connecting our registry team HARP account to your clinic HARP account. And we're going to use that information throughout the year to help make sure that everything's staying in sync and to give us a better ability to help you research issues as they come up. So when you see that access request come across, it's definitely from us. It'll come from C3 Partners Registry within your HARP account, and you should approve that as soon as you can. Now, once we've got those kind of basic things behind us, we like to set up the first interaction, kind of face-to-face or Zoom-to-Zoom interaction. We like to use an annual planning session. An annual planning session is going to be with, generally over here when we say participants, when we say C3 Consulting, it's going to be myself or one of our other, regulatory and optimization consulting staff, and probably your lead client operational person who's going to be responsible for MIPS as we go throughout the year. The fundamental outputs of the annual planning is we're starting to build your profile into Macromonitor. I expect that we'll be documenting your expected improvement activities. We'll be making a selection of what clinical quality measures we should be expecting to get from the data feed on your behalf. And we may have some suggestions for you on measures that are that we think should be inside or outside that group. If your measure population is particularly large, and you don't want to code for all of the possible measures, we'll collaborate on coming up with what we think is a very good and efficient selection. One of the other things that happens is we automatically load Macromonitor. The first time you see it, it will have all of your physicians loaded in it. And we can make sure that we have all the correct physicians, or if there are physicians that are in that list that are no longer with you, we'll want to winnow them out, and get the CMS list equivalent to the list of your operational staff and teams. And then as we've got all that data, one of the first things we always do is to take a look at what do we think are the financial implications to you of macro for each specific year. So Macromonitor is smart enough to know what are the Medicare payments that each of your physicians is expecting. It's smart enough to know some minimum, maximum, and budget scores, target scores that you could be reaching. And for each of those different levels, we're going to be projecting what's the financial penalty or reward that you should be anticipating as a result of the macro optimization work that we're doing throughout the year. We'll start to upload data from from Imagine from your billing company, or if you're not using a billing company, then getting the data directly from from your team. And this can happen somewhat in conjunction with the annual planning phase. It doesn't have to be a nose to tail relationship between these, but they should have fairly close proximity. But basically, once we establish that we turn on the data feed, our technical team, the C3 data team, is going to be looking at that feed, and they're going to be looking at the data that comes in and make sure we're getting everything, make sure that all the data elements that would be a normal part of that feed are actually coming across, and they're not they're not corrupted, and that we're getting everything that will contribute to having an accurate representation of your quality scores. Now, once our technical team has verified that we're getting that content, then we're going to move on, and we're going to have another individual at C3 Partners. Like I said, this will be our consulting team. We'll go through, we have we call a reasonableness checklist in terms of looking at your data. And we'll probably, once we build that reasonableness checklist ourselves, we'll set up a meeting with you all to talk about what did we observe. And some of the these aren't an exhaustive list of everything that we're going to see, but we want to make sure that all of the physicians that we validated back in the annual planning stage are actually getting data. Are there physicians that are coming in on the data upload that we did not account for back in the planning stage? And if so, how should we account for those? We like to look at the data and make sure that it's a nice, clean, whole period with no visible or obvious gaps in the date range. Did we drop a month out of a 6-month process or something like that? We also want to make sure that we're getting all of the encounters that we would expect to get across all of the measures that you're expecting to see, back in the annual planning stage, and that the data completeness. In other words, all of the measures that we're receiving are 75% or more of them actually getting the codes that they're expected to get based on the measures that they're associated with. Now, once your team and ours has taken a look, and if there are any shortfalls in this preliminary data review, we've gotten those shortfalls either set aside, we're good, or we've gotten them repaired, and we've reloaded whatever data we have. We now have our first assurance that we have a nice clean set of data. The last formal step that we do is something that's required of us by CMS, and that is that we have a formal audit against that data. In general, we're going to choose about 50 encounters per physician. Now, if you're a very large group and you've got 100 providers, we don't have to audit all of the physicians. We have an audit sampling methodology, or we'll select a subset of those. In general, it's probably never more than 10 or 15 physicians out of a group. But we'll randomly select a set of encounters based on the content that we've received. And then we're going to ask you to provide us clinical data on those encounters. So depending on your specialty and where you have data, it could be PDF of your paper charts. It could be a printout from your EHR or your hospital's EHR, or whatever is the appropriate clinical data source. We'll get that in front of our auditors. Our auditors will work through and actually recode all of those encounters, and we'll compare our results, our code results, to your coded results. Most of the time, those things are going to match out pretty perfectly. And we've even got a little bit of room for some slight levels of discrepancies, as long as we're no more than 4% different between your results and our results, then we're in good shape. And when year end comes around, we're allowed to submit to CMS with a discrepancy of no greater than that. If the discrepancy is larger, then we can still continue on with our ongoing activities. It's just that we can't submit data to CMS at year end until all of those discrepancies have been worked out. Now, one of the things is, sometimes when those discrepancies happen, sometimes there's sections in measure specifications where two reasonable people can have different interpretations of how a particular section of the specification should be interpreted. In the event that those occur, we have a process where we'll reach out and we'll interact with the relevant measure steward. Which of these interpretations you believe should be? Now, once we've completed the onboarding activities, we move into what we call ongoing optimization. CMS expects that a certified registry will interact with each member clinic at least 4 times a year. And we think 4 times a year is not enough. We really want to get together with you, even as often as monthly. Now, the net result of all that, of course, is submission to CMS after the year end. As soon as the data has been submitted, or actually the day after the data has been submitted, or we're going to use the HARP credentials that you granted us to be able to log into your HARP account, and we're going to make sure that the data we sent to CMS is represented in CMS in the same way that we think it should be. And we want to do that right away, because if there's anything that's doesn't look quite right, we'll be able to retract or resubmit or make adjustments before the end of the submission period, so that everybody knows that's done. We'll actually print out the CMS submission PDF and we'll store it into the Macromonitor action items. Once we get a little further on in the year, we'll be able to, at that point, we'll be able to log into your HARP account again. We'll pull down a copy of the PDF of that preliminary score and make sure everything is, again, as expected. If not, then we're going to help you draft up a request for a targeted review. Can't submit it yet, but this gives you this step gives you a month or two to be thinking about it and drafting up a request for CMS to make adjustments based on differences between how they scored your content, how we believe it should have been scored. And then, of course, the final review really comes when CMS publishes the final report, generally between 3 and 5 months after the close of the year. So if we've identified discrepancies in the preliminary report and we're ready for a targeted review, as soon as that final report gets published, we can go ahead and submit a request for a targeted review. Of course, most of the time that's not going to be the case. Everything will be fine, and we'll be able to post that copy of the final review into Macromonitor, and your reporting year is done. All right, so that's our annual operating cycle, onboarding cycle. I hope that's been useful for you, and we really look forward to working with you throughout the year.